In this episode of True Crimes Unfold, we unravel the case of a trusted friend, a lethal poison, and a trail of death that rocked Thailand. This is the chilling story of Cyanide Am, Thailand's deadliest suspected serial killer. Please note that events and scenarios in this video may be graphic for some viewers. Discretion is advised. Details of the videos are taken from actual case files. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where you're listening from, what type of cases you'd like us to cover next, and we'll make sure to add them to our list. And don't forget to subscribe to get new stories as soon as they're released. Now settle in, get ready, and let's begin. In the bustling streets of Thailand, where trust and community run deep, one woman harbored a secret so sinister it sent shockwaves through the nation. Amsararat, a seemingly ordinary friend and confidant, was hiding a deadly weapon, a vial of cyanide and an insatiable greed that would make her Thailand's deadliest suspected serial killer. Over the span of 8 years, she allegedly turned trust into betrayal, friendship into fatality, and her victims' lives into her personal profit. Amsararat was the picture of trustworthiness, a loving mother, a devoted partner, and a friend you could count on. Her warm smile and gentle demeanor made her a figure of comfort in her community. But beneath the facade of kindness lurked a cold-blooded predator with a chilling plan. Her victims were often women, drawn into her web through shared struggles and promises of help. They trusted her with their secrets, their money, and ultimately their lives. But Am's kindness came with a deadly price. She allegedly lured her victims into situations where she could strike with precision, leaving no trace of her true intentions, only a trail of heartbreak and loss. She seemed so genuine, a former friend said, her voice trembling. I never thought she could be capable of something so evil. Cyanide, a chemical so potent that even a tiny dose can cause death within minutes, became Am's weapon of choice. Odorless and tasteless, it is the perfect tool for a killer with no conscience. Forensic experts would later reveal that traces of cyanide were found in the remains of several victims, each poisoned in carefully orchestrated attacks. Am allegedly carried the poison in her bag, a small vial hidden among everyday items. To her victims, she was just a friend sharing a meal, a drink, or a gift. But those moments of camaraderie became their final memories. It's terrifying, a forensic investigator said. Cyanide doesn't just kill, it destroys lives in seconds. The fact that she used it so effortlessly speaks volumes about her coldness. The chilling saga began in 2015, when Am's first known victim, a close acquaintance, died suddenly after a casual outing. At the time, the death was ruled as natural causes, an unfortunate tragedy that left loved ones reeling. But looking back, investigators now believe this was the start of Am's sinister spree. Am allegedly targeted her victims for their money. She promised financial help, business opportunities, or loans with favorable terms. Once she gained their trust and access to their funds, she struck. The deaths appeared sudden and unexplainable. Heart attacks, strokes, or accidents, but the truth lay hidden beneath layers of deceit. She preyed on vulnerability. A police spokesperson said her victims trusted her, and she used that trust to her advantage. For years, Am's crimes went unnoticed, each death seemingly disconnected from the next. Victims ranged from struggling single mothers to successful entrepreneurs, all linked by one common thread: their trust in Am. Among the most heartbreaking cases was that of a young mother who confided in Am during a financial crisis, only to lose her life after a shared meal. What made Am's actions even more sinister was her ability to blend into the lives of her victims. She attended their funerals, consoled their grieving families, and even offered financial help to cover burial costs, funded by the money she had stolen from her victims. "She cried with us," one victim's relative recounted. "We thought she was mourning too. Now I realize it was all a show." Am's reign of terror might have continued indefinitely if not for a critical mistake. In early 2023, a 53-year-old woman named Siripon collapsed during a religious ceremony minutes after consuming a meal with Am. Siripon's family, suspicious of the suddenness of her death, pushed for an autopsy. The results were shocking. High levels of cyanide were found in her system. This revelation opened the floodgates. Investigators began connecting the dots between Siripon's death and a series of similar fatalities, all linked to Am. What had once seemed like tragic coincidences now pointed to a calculated pattern of murder. As the investigation unfolded, the details of Am's alleged crimes stunned the nation. How could a woman, so seemingly ordinary, commit such heinous acts? What drove her to kill, again and again, without remorse? And how had she evaded suspicion for so long? News outlets dubbed her Cyanide Am, a name that quickly became synonymous with betrayal and horror. Social media erupted with speculation, outrage, and grief for the victims and their families. The public couldn't comprehend how someone could weaponize trust in such a calculated and heartless way. "This isn't just a crime, it's a betrayal of humanity," a commentator said during a primetime broadcast. "She used love and friendship as weapons, and that's what makes this case so chilling." With the evidence mounting, authorities launched a manhunt for Am, who had gone into hiding. The case became a race against time, as investigators feared she might claim more victims or flee the country. Meanwhile, forensic teams worked around the clock, exhuming bodies, analyzing toxicology reports, and piecing together the web of deceit that Am had woven over nearly a decade. "This case is unlike anything we've seen before," an investigator remarked. "The scale, the planning, the cold-bloodedness. It's terrifying, but we're determined to bring her to justice." The race to uncover the truth behind Cyanide Am's deadly spree began with a single death, but soon spiraled into a case that shook Thailand to its core. As investigators delved deeper into her past, a horrifying pattern emerged, one that exposed a trail of betrayal, greed, and carefully concealed murders. What began as suspicions quickly turned into a web of undeniable evidence that pointed directly to Am Sararat. Siripon's sudden death during a religious ceremony was the catalyst that brought Am's sinister actions to light. Her family, unwilling to accept the vague explanation of natural causes, pushed for an autopsy, a decision that would unravel Am's carefully constructed facade. Forensic toxicologists detected high levels of cyanide in Siripon's bloodstream. The finding was both shocking and undeniable. Siripon had been poisoned. The discovery prompted investigators to revisit the circumstances of her death, including her connection to Am. Siripon was not the only person in Am's circle to have died under suspicious circumstances. As investigators combed through police reports and hospital records, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. Over the span of 8 years, multiple individuals who had financial dealings or personal relationships with Am had died suddenly, often with no clear cause of death. Financial motives. Many of Am's alleged victims had one thing in common. They had trusted her with their money. Whether through business ventures, loans, or outright theft, Am appeared to target individuals she could exploit financially. Unexplained symptoms. Witnesses reported similar symptoms in several cases: nausea, dizziness, and sudden collapse, all consistent with cyanide poisoning. However, these symptoms were often misattributed to natural causes or pre-existing conditions. The victim pool. Victims ranged from close friends to acquaintances and even former lovers. Am's ability to blend into their lives, earning their trust before betraying them, was a hallmark of her calculated approach. Once the presence of cyanide was confirmed in Siripon's case, investigators began looking for links to other deaths. They exhumed bodies and conducted toxicology tests, finding traces of the lethal poison in multiple victims. This breakthrough provided the forensic evidence needed to tie Am to the crimes. Toxicology results. Cyanide was detected in at least 13 cases connected to Am. The consistency of the findings left little doubt that the poison was her weapon of choice. Forensic analysis. Experts noted the precision with which the poison had been administered. Whether mixed into food, drinks, or even pills, Am had found ways to deliver the deadly dose without arousing suspicion. Cyanide acquisition. Investigators traced the source of the poison to a chemical supplier, uncovering records that showed Am had purchased cyanide under an alias. The documentation was a key piece of evidence in building the case against her. Am's ability to evade suspicion for so long was a testament to her skill as a manipulator. She cultivated an image of kindness and reliability, often positioning herself as a trusted friend or confidant. This allowed her to gain access to her victims' lives and their vulnerabilities. Attending funerals. In a chilling twist, Am often attended the funerals of her victims, offering condolences to grieving families while hiding her own culpability. Her presence at these gatherings added an extra layer of betrayal to her crimes. Feigned innocence. Am was adept at deflecting suspicion. When questioned about the sudden deaths of those around her, she would feign shock and sadness, presenting herself as a victim of circumstance rather than the orchestrator of tragedy. Exploiting trust. Am's victims saw her as a friend, mentor, or partner. Her ability to exploit their trust made her actions all the more devastating, as those closest to her became her targets. While the forensic evidence was damning, it was Am's financial dealings that painted a clear picture of her motives. Investigators uncovered a pattern of fraud, theft, and deception that spanned years. Stolen assets. Am allegedly drained her victims' bank accounts, forging signatures and creating false documents to gain access to their funds. In one case, she emptied an account just hours after the victim's death. Business scams. Promising lucrative returns on investments, Am convinced her victims to hand over large sums of money. These schemes often ended with the victims' deaths, allowing Am to pocket the proceeds without facing questions. Lavish lifestyle. The stolen money funded Am's extravagant lifestyle, including expensive vacations, luxury goods, and high-end real estate. Her outward success masked the sinister means by which it was achieved. As the details of Am's crimes came to light, public outrage grew. News outlets reported on the case around the clock, and social media exploded with discussions about the cyanide killer. The shocking nature of her crimes, targeting friends and loved ones for financial gain, captivated and horrified the nation. Social media reaction. Hashtags like Cyanide Am and Justice for Victims trended for weeks, with users sharing their disbelief and grief for the victims. Calls for accountability. The case highlighted systemic failures, including gaps in law enforcement and regulatory oversight. Advocacy groups demanded reforms to prevent similar crimes in the future. Victim memorials. Families of the victims held public memorials to honor their loved ones and keep attention on the case. These events became a symbol of resilience and the pursuit of justice. With evidence mounting, authorities intensified their efforts to locate and apprehend Am. Surveillance teams tracked her movements, while forensic experts worked to strengthen the case against her. The public, gripped by the unfolding drama, waited anxiously for news of her capture. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, the hunt for Cyanide Am became a national obsession. With mounting evidence of her guilt, authorities raced against time to locate the woman responsible for one of the deadliest killing sprees in Thailand's history. The pressure was immense, the stakes were high, and the chase culminated in a dramatic arrest that captivated the world. When authorities officially named Am Sararat as the prime suspect, she vanished. What began as routine questioning quickly escalated into a full-blown manhunt, with police scouring the country for any trace of the elusive killer. Her disappearance added an extra layer of intrigue to an already sensational case. Evading capture. Am's ability to stay one step ahead of law enforcement spoke to her cunning and resourcefulness. She used false identities, changed locations frequently, and relied on a network of contacts to stay under the radar. Sightings and leads. Reports of Am's whereabouts flooded in from across the country. Some claimed to have seen her boarding buses, shopping at markets, or hiding in remote villages. Each lead was pursued relentlessly, but Am seemed to vanish as quickly as she appeared. Public fear. The idea of a suspected serial killer on the loose sent shockwaves through Thailand. Residents were urged to stay vigilant, and social media was abuzz with speculation and warnings. The breakthrough in the case came from an unlikely source. A former associate of Am, who contacted police with critical information. The informant revealed that Am had been staying in a small coastal town, using a rented apartment as a hideout. With this lead in hand, authorities closed in. Surveillance operation. Investigators monitored the apartment for days, gathering intelligence and ensuring they had the right target. Am was seen coming and going, blending into the community as if she had nothing to hide. Coordinated raid. On a humid morning, a team of officers surrounded the apartment. The operation was swift and precise, with authorities storming the building before Am had a chance to escape. She was found inside, calm and composed, as if she had been expecting them. Arrested without incident, Am was taken into custody without resistance. Her demeanor during the arrest was chilling. She showed no signs of panic or remorse, maintaining a stoic expression as officers led her away. Following Am's arrest, investigators began piecing together the full scope of her crimes. The evidence collected from her hideout and previous locations painted a damning picture of premeditation and deception. The cyanide stash. A small vial of cyanide was discovered among Am's personal belongings, along with tools and chemicals used to dilute and administer the poison. This find was a smoking gun that directly tied her to the method of murder. Victim records. Investigators found a notebook containing detailed information about her victims, names, financial transactions, and notes about their vulnerabilities. The chilling document revealed the meticulous planning behind her crimes. Financial documents, bank statements, forged contracts, and loan agreements uncovered in Am's possession highlighted her financial motives. She had systematically drained her victims' accounts, leaving a paper trail of theft and fraud. During questioning, Am remained composed, offering cryptic responses and denying any wrongdoing. Her calm demeanor unnerved investigators, who described her as cold and calculating. Despite overwhelming evidence, Am refused to admit guilt, instead framing herself as a victim of circumstance. Denial and deflection. Am claimed that the deaths were coincidences and that her connections to the victims were purely business-related. She dismissed the cyanide discovery as a misunderstanding, insisting she had no knowledge of its presence. Hints of manipulation. Investigators noted Am's ability to manipulate conversations, deflecting blame and attempting to sow doubt about the evidence. Her psychological profile suggested a high level of intelligence and an uncanny ability to control narratives. Unanswered questions. Despite hours of interrogation, Am refused to provide details about her actions, leaving investigators to rely on forensic evidence and witness testimony to build their case. The news of Am's capture was met with a mixture of relief and outrage. For weeks, her name had dominated headlines, with the public following every twist and turn of the investigation. Her arrest marked a turning point, but it also raised new questions about how she had been able to operate undetected for so long. Media frenzy. News outlets covered the arrest extensively, broadcasting images of Am in handcuffs and analyzing every detail of the operation. The public's fascination with the case reached a fever pitch, with millions tuning in to watch the story unfold. Outpouring of grief. Families of the victims held vigils and memorials, honoring the lives lost and demanding justice. The arrest brought a sense of closure, but the pain of their loss remained palpable. Calls for reform. Advocacy groups used the case to highlight systemic issues, including gaps in law enforcement oversight and the lack of protections for vulnerable individuals. The public outcry fueled demands for change, ensuring that Am's crimes would not be forgotten. With Am in custody, the focus shifted to preparing for one of the most high-profile trials in Thailand's history. Prosecutors faced the daunting task of presenting the extensive evidence against her, while Am's defense team prepared to challenge every aspect of the case. Building the case. Investigators worked tirelessly to strengthen their case, conducting further forensic tests, interviewing witnesses, and connecting the dots between Am's financial motives and the deaths of her victims. Public expectations. The trial became a symbol of accountability, with the nation demanding a swift and decisive verdict. For many, Am's arrest was only the first step in a long journey toward justice. The unknowns. Even with Am in custody, unanswered questions lingered. How many victims had there truly been? Were there accomplices? And what had driven Am to commit such horrific acts over so many years? The arrest of Cyanide Am marked a turning point in a case that had gripped Thailand and the world. Her calm demeanor, chilling methods, and calculated manipulation made her a figure of both fear and fascination. As the trial loomed, the nation braced itself for what promised to be an unforgettable chapter in the story of Thailand's deadliest suspected serial killer. The trial of Cyanide Am was more than a legal proceeding. It was a spectacle that captivated Thailand and laid bare the horrors of her alleged crimes as evidence mounted and witnesses took the stand. The courtroom became a battleground for justice, filled with emotional testimonies, forensic revelations, and chilling glimpses into the mind of a suspected serial killer. From the outset, the prosecution made it clear that they intended to hold Amsararat fully accountable for her actions. Armed with overwhelming evidence, they painted a portrait of a cold and calculating woman who had exploited trust, greed, and poison to commit her crimes. Evidence of premeditation. Prosecutors emphasized the methodical nature of Am's alleged murders. They presented her internet search history, which included terms like how to kill with cyanide and poison dosage calculations. The notebook recovered from her hideout, containing detailed entries about her victims, their financial assets, and notes on their vulnerabilities, was a key piece of evidence. Forensic findings. Toxicology reports confirmed that cyanide was present in the remains of at least 13 victims, all of whom had connections to Am. The prosecution highlighted the consistency of the poisoning method, arguing that it was a signature of her crimes. The cyanide vial found in Am's possession was presented as the murder weapon, with forensic experts testifying that its chemical composition matched the poison found in the victim's systems. Financial motives. Bank records, forged documents, and fraudulent transactions established a clear pattern of financial exploitation. Prosecutors argued that Am targeted individuals who trusted her, using their money to fund her lavish lifestyle. To humanize the case and emphasize the devastating impact of Am's alleged actions, the prosecution called family members and friends of the victims to testify. Their emotional accounts brought the courtroom to tears and reminded everyone of the real human cost of her crimes. Siripon's family. Siripon's daughter described her mother as a loving, generous woman who had trusted Am with her finances. She thought Am was her friend, she said through tears. She never imagined that trust would cost her life. The young mother. The sister of another victim, a single mother who died after a meal with Am, recounted how the family struggled to cope with her sudden death. She left behind 2 children who asked for their mom every day. She said, Am didn't just kill her, she destroyed a family. Patterns of manipulation. Testimonies revealed how Am had ingratiated herself into her victims' lives, often offering help and support before betraying them. These accounts painted a picture of a master manipulator who weaponized trust for personal gain. Am's defense team faced an uphill battle against the mountain of evidence, but they sought to create doubt by challenging the prosecution's narrative. Their strategy hinged on portraying Am as a victim of circumstance rather than a calculated killer. Denial of involvement. Am maintained her innocence, claiming she had no knowledge of the cyanide and no motive to harm her friends and acquaintances. Her defense argued that the presence of cyanide in her possession was coincidental and that the deaths were natural or unrelated. Questioning the evidence, the defense attempted to undermine the forensic findings, suggesting that the toxicology results could have been contaminated or misinterpreted. They also argued that the financial records were circumstantial and did not prove a direct link to the murders. Mental health defense. In a last-ditch effort, the defense introduced psychologists who testified that Am suffered from mental health issues, including narcissistic tendencies and a detachment from reality. They argued that these conditions made her incapable of planning and executing such crimes with precision. When Am took the stand, her testimony was as unsettling as it was revealing. Speaking in a calm and measured tone, she denied the charges against her, but offered cryptic answers that left the courtroom uneasy, calculated responses. Am deflected blame, claiming that the victims' deaths were unfortunate coincidences. "I had nothing to do with it," she said repeatedly, her voice devoid of emotion. Moments of arrogance. At times, Am's demeanor bordered on smugness, as if she relished the attention. "You're making me into a villain," she told the prosecution, "but you have no proof." Lack of remorse. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of her testimony was her complete lack of empathy. When asked if she felt any guilt for the victims' deaths, she simply replied, "I have nothing to apologize for." The most damning moments of the trial came from forensic experts who presented irrefutable evidence linking Am to the murders. Their testimony left little doubt about the deliberate nature of her actions. Toxicology. Analysis. Experts explained how cyanide poisoning affects the body, detailing the symptoms observed in the victims. They confirmed that the levels of cyanide found in the victims were consistent with deliberate poisoning, chemical composition. Forensic chemists testified that the cyanide found in Am's possession matched the substance detected in the victims, further tying her to the crimes. Digital evidence. Am's search history, recovered from her devices, was presented in court. Terms like "how to hide a body" and "lethal doses of poison" left no room for ambiguity. After weeks of testimony and evidence, the jury delivered a unanimous verdict. Guilty. Am was convicted of multiple counts of premeditated murder, fraud, and possession of a lethal substance. The judge sentenced her to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Describing her crimes as a betrayal of trust on an unimaginable scale. The courtroom erupted in emotion. Relief from the victims' families, outrage from Am's remaining supporters, and a sense of closure for a nation that had followed the case with bated breath. Public outcry. The case reignited calls for reforms in law enforcement, forensic investigations, and financial regulation. Many questioned how Am had been able to operate undetected for so long. Advocacy movements. Advocacy groups used the case to raise awareness about coercive control, financial exploitation, and the vulnerabilities of women in abusive or manipulative relationships. Memorials for victims. Public memorials were held across the country, honoring the lives lost and emphasizing the need for systemic change to prevent similar tragedies. The trial of Cyanide Am was more than a legal battle. It was a societal reckoning. Her crimes exposed flaws in systems meant to protect the vulnerable and highlighted the dark side of trust and manipulation. As the nation reflected on the lessons of the case, one thing was clear: the fight for justice and accountability must continue. Amsararat's heinous actions left a scar on Thailand that extended far beyond the courtroom. Her crimes exposed vulnerabilities in the nation's legal, financial, and social systems, sparking a wave of public outrage and demands for change. The aftermath of her conviction became a rallying cry for reform, with her victim stories serving as both a cautionary tale and a call to action. The Cyanide Am case revealed significant gaps in Thailand's investigative and regulatory frameworks, prompting questions about how a single individual could carry out such a prolonged killing spree without detection. The public and policymakers alike called for urgent reforms, improved investigative practices. Critics pointed to the lack of coordination between police departments, which allowed Am's pattern of crimes to go unnoticed for years. In response, law enforcement agencies committed to creating a centralized database for tracking suspicious deaths and cross-referencing cases with shared elements, such as cause of death or financial ties. Enhanced training. Forensic and investigative training programs were expanded to equip officers with the skills needed to detect subtle signs of foul play, particularly in cases involving poison or financial exploitation. Accountability measures. Public pressure led to internal reviews within law enforcement agencies, with several high-ranking officials facing scrutiny for their failure to connect the dots earlier in the investigation. Am's crimes highlighted the ease with which she manipulated financial systems to exploit her victims, raising concerns about fraud prevention and consumer protections. Tightening regulations. Financial institutions introduced stricter monitoring of large transactions, loan agreements, and account activities to identify and flag suspicious patterns. These measures aim to prevent individuals like Am from draining victims' accounts without oversight. Consumer education. Banks and advocacy groups launched educational campaigns to help the public recognize red flags in financial dealings, such as coercion, sudden changes in account activity, or pressure to sign documents without understanding their implications. Fraud prevention initiatives. New policies were implemented to improve the verification of signatures, identity documents, and financial agreements, ensuring that forgery and theft would be more difficult to execute. Vulnerabilities of women in Am's case brought to light the particular vulnerabilities faced by women in Thailand, especially those navigating financial hardships or strained personal relationships. Advocacy groups seized on the case to push for greater protections and support systems. Empowering women. Community organizations launched programs focused on financial literacy, self-defense, and recognizing manipulative behaviors. These initiatives aim to empower women to assert their independence and protect themselves from exploitation. Support for victims. Resources for victims of domestic abuse, coercive control, and financial fraud were expanded. Helplines, counseling services, and legal aid became more accessible to women in vulnerable situations. Changing narratives. The media's portrayal of Am's victims shifted over time, focusing less on their perceived naivety and more on the societal structures that enabled their exploitation. This change in narrative helped to combat victim blaming and foster empathy for those affected. At the heart of the Cyanide Am case was a profound betrayal of trust. Her ability to weaponize friendship and loyalty resonated deeply with the public, prompting widespread introspection about the nature of trust and the dangers of manipulation. Redefining relationships. Social commentators highlighted the importance of healthy boundaries in personal and professional relationships, emphasizing the need to recognize and address red flags before they escalate. Strengthening communities. Community groups organized workshops and events to promote open communication and mutual support, creating networks where individuals could share concerns and seek advice without fear of judgment. Raising awareness. Educational campaigns focused on identifying manipulative behaviors, such as gaslighting, coercion, and undue influence. These efforts aim to equip individuals with the tools to protect themselves and their loved ones from similar exploitation. The media's extensive coverage of the Cyanide Am case played a crucial role in shaping public perception and sparking widespread discourse. Social media amplified these conversations, turning outrage into action. Victim advocacy. Hashtags like "Justice for Victims" and "Stop Manipulation" trended for weeks, keeping the victim stories in the public eye and pressuring authorities to act swiftly and transparently. Documentaries and podcasts. Filmmakers and journalists produced in-depth documentaries and podcasts about the case, exploring its societal implications and honoring the lives of the victims. These projects ensured that the lessons of the Cyanide Am case would not be forgotten. Grassroots movements. Activists organized rallies, memorials, and fundraising events to support victims' families and advocate for systemic reforms. These movements united people across the country in a shared commitment to justice and accountability. As the nation grappled with the enormity of Am's crimes, efforts to honor the victims took center stage. Their lives, though tragically cut short, became symbols of resilience and a reminder of the need for change. Public tributes. Memorial services and vigils were held in cities across Thailand, attended by thousands who came to pay their respects and show solidarity with the victims' families. Scholarships and charities. In memory of the victims, scholarships were established to support the education of underprivileged children, while charities focused on preventing domestic violence and financial exploitation received increased funding. Art and storytelling. Artists and writers created works inspired by the victims' stories, ensuring that their lives and legacies would continue to inspire and educate future generations. While the Cyanide Am case was one of heartbreak and betrayal, it also served as a catalyst for meaningful change. The lessons learned from her crimes have prompted a renewed commitment to justice, accountability, and the protection of vulnerable individuals. Policy reforms. Governments and organizations across Thailand implemented new policies to address the systemic issues exposed by the case, from improving investigative practices to expanding victim support services. Cultural shifts. The public's response to the case marked a shift in societal attitudes, with greater emphasis on empathy, accountability, and collective responsibility. Ongoing advocacy. Advocacy groups continue to use the Cyanide Am case as a platform to push for further reforms, ensuring that the lessons of her crimes are not forgotten. The Cyanide Am case is a haunting reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind a facade of trust and kindness. But it is also a testament to the resilience of those who fight for justice, the power of community, and the possibility of transformation in the wake of tragedy. We cannot bring back those we have lost, one advocate said at a recent memorial, but we can honor them by building a society where trust is sacred, manipulation is exposed, and justice prevails. The case of Am Sararat, dubbed Cyanide Am, is one that Thailand will not soon forget. Beyond the shocking details of her crimes, her story has become a powerful symbol of the need for societal change. Her victims' tragic deaths have spurred a movement of awareness, reform, and remembrance, leaving an indelible mark on the nation. The Cyanide Am case revealed glaring gaps in Thailand's legal, financial, and social systems. The nation's response has been swift, with reforms aimed at addressing the vulnerabilities her crimes exposed. Strengthened law enforcement. The case underscored the importance of coordination between police departments and forensic investigators. A centralized crime database has since been proposed, allowing authorities to identify patterns and connections between seemingly isolated incidents. Tighter regulations on hazardous substances. Cyanide's accessibility came under heavy scrutiny. New policies now regulate the sale and distribution of hazardous substances, requiring stricter documentation and monitoring to prevent misuse. Financial oversight improvements. Banks and financial institutions have implemented enhanced security measures, including advanced fraud detection systems and stricter protocols for loan approvals. These changes aim to protect individuals from financial exploitation, similar to what Am's victims endured. While justice has been served, the victims remain at the heart of this story. Efforts to honor their lives have been central to the national dialogue, ensuring they are remembered not just as victims, but as individuals with stories, dreams, and loved ones. Memorials and vigils. Across the country, public memorials have been held to honor the lives lost. These gatherings have served as spaces for collective mourning and solidarity, with families sharing stories about their loved ones and calling for continued vigilance against similar crimes. Victim support initiatives. Foundations have been established in the victims' names to support families dealing with loss and trauma. These organizations provide financial assistance, counseling, and legal aid, ensuring that those left behind receive the help they need to heal. Community empowerment. Advocacy groups have used the victim stories to inspire action, encouraging communities to remain vigilant and to support one another in identifying and addressing signs of manipulation and abuse. The Cyanide Am case also triggered a deeper cultural reflection on the nature of trust, manipulation, and systemic power dynamics. It highlighted the ways in which societal norms can enable exploitation and underscored the importance of fostering a culture of accountability. Redefining trust. Conversations about the case have emphasized the need to balance trust with caution. Educational campaigns now teach individuals how to recognize red flags in relationships and financial dealings, empowering them to protect themselves and their loved ones. Confronting gender inequality. Am's victims were predominantly women, many of whom faced vulnerabilities tied to economic and social inequality. The case has sparked discussions about the unique challenges faced by women in Thailand and the need for gender-focused policies and protections, breaking the stigma around fraud and abuse. By reframing the narrative around victims of financial and emotional manipulation, the case has helped to reduce stigma and promote empathy. Victim blaming has been replaced by a focus on systemic accountability and collective support. From the moment Am's crimes were uncovered, media coverage played a pivotal role in bringing her actions to light and keeping the story in the public eye. This coverage, while often sensational, also had a profound impact on public awareness and advocacy. Informing the public, detailed reporting on the investigation and trial educated the public about the mechanisms of Am's crimes, fostering a better understanding of coercion, manipulation, and systemic vulnerabilities. Driving advocacy, social media campaigns and documentaries about the case mobilized grassroots movements, turning public outrage into tangible actions for reform. Ensuring transparency. Media scrutiny helped to ensure that the investigation and trial were conducted with transparency and integrity, holding authorities accountable at every step of the process. For the families of Am's victims, the journey toward justice has been painful but transformative. They have become advocates, using their personal loss to push for systemic change and to ensure that no other family endures what they have. Voices of change. Families have spoken at public events, memorials, and forums, sharing their experiences and calling for continued reforms. Their courage has inspired others to come forward with their own stories of exploitation and abuse. Legacy building. Through scholarships, charities, and advocacy work, the victims' families have created lasting legacies for their loved ones, turning tragedy into a force for good. Support networks. Families have banded together to form support groups, providing emotional and practical assistance to one another as they navigate the aftermath of their loss. While the Cyanide Am case is rooted in Thailand, its impact has reached far beyond the nation's borders. It has sparked international conversations about similar crimes, the misuse of trust, and the importance of systemic vigilance. Comparisons to other cases. Am's crimes have drawn comparisons to other infamous serial killers, prompting discussions about the psychological and societal factors that enable such individuals to operate undetected. International advocacy. Global advocacy groups have used the case to highlight issues such as gender-based violence, financial fraud, and the need for international cooperation in regulating hazardous substances. Cross-border reforms. Countries with similar vulnerabilities have begun examining their own systems in light of the Cyanide Am case, implementing reforms to prevent similar tragedies. The story of Cyanide Am is one that will continue to be told for years to come. It is a story of betrayal and loss, but also one of resilience, reform, and hope. As Thailand moves forward, the lessons of this case will serve as a constant reminder of the importance of vigilance, accountability, and compassion. Educational curricula. Schools and universities are incorporating the case into their curricula as a way to teach students about ethics, law, and the complexities of human behavior. Cultural reflection. Artists, writers, and filmmakers have used the case as inspiration, creating works that explore its themes and ensure that its lessons are never forgotten. Ongoing advocacy. Advocacy groups continue to push for reforms inspired by the case, from expanding victim protections to improving forensic capabilities and regulatory oversight. The Cyanide Am case is a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind a facade of trust. But it is also a testament to the power of justice, community, and the human spirit. Through the pain of loss and the pursuit of accountability, Thailand has shown that even in the face of unimaginable betrayal, resilience and hope can prevail. This isn't just a story about crime, one advocate said. It's a story about change, about turning tragedy into progress, and about honoring those we've lost by building a better future. Tuzar Ong's crimes may be behind bars, but her victim's legacy lives on. Their stories have sparked a movement, ensuring that their voices will echo for generations to come.